And I kept having these moments of like, God, I wish I could just stop for a minute and just do something else. Because I was getting so frustrated by being a stay-at-home dad.
Hello and welcome to the Dad Dialogue Podcast, the show where we talk about the successes and the stresses of becoming a dad and being a dad. My name is Laurence. Thank you so much for joining us today. Quick reminder, you can go over to daddialogue.co.uk if you would like to register your interest in being a guest on a future episode. Today's guest is Dustin. Dustin has 2 young girls and he is a dad who has ADHD. During our episode, we talk about the challenges that having ADHD brings to parenting. And we also talk about his process of being a stay-at-home dad for a little while with his daughters. We also talk about some various different stories relating to hospital visits, ER visits, and the importance of our mentalities as parents and what we offer to our family in those kind of traumatic times and traumatic experiences, and how it's important to stay calm amongst other things. Lots and lots of things to talk about, so let's get into the conversation.
Okay, so Dustin, thank you so much for joining us for the Dad Dialogue podcast today. Can you just start off by telling our listeners just a little bit about yourself and your family?
Sure. So I'm a dad of 2. I have 2 girls, approaching 4 and approaching 2.
Mm-hmm.
So to say that I'm in the thick of it right now is sometimes it feels like an understatement.
Mm-hmm.
Especially the last week. It's been tough. I don't know about you, but this time of the year too is also like everyone's getting sick. The seasons are changing. Right now where I live, it's supposed to be in the upper 70s Fahrenheit. So it's considerably warm for the day it's supposed to be, the time of the year. So we're contending with, all the ups and downs of child rearing at the moment. But I have 2 kids and my wife and I, and I have a background in education, and I'm a person with ADHD. So that's also why I wanted to do this, was to talk about, my experiences trying to juggle being a person with ADHD on top of such a stressful thing like being a parent.
Mm.
But what I guess I would say I love about what I do, like as a parent, is, dare I say, it's fun.
Oh yeah.
I don't know, I'm sure you're familiar with the show Bluey. Like the first time I saw that and I saw the dad bandit, I was like, that's my guy. Like I was a relatively new dad. I'm like, that's kind of the approach I'm going for. It's kind of nice that I'm seeing it portrayed, in TV shows, just because it felt like I was also kind of doing what was intuitive to me, but also to see that other people kind of gravitate to that approach as well.
Sure. I'm curious about the actual birthdays, because I also have a youngest approaching 2 and an oldest approaching 4. So my youngest turns 2 in December and my oldest turns 4 in January.
That's funny. My oldest turns 4 in January and my youngest turns 2 in February.
Okay. So yeah, very close.
Yeah.
So yeah,
very close.
Right alongside you in terms of that.
Yes.
That age gap of the youngest one is starting to get a little bit more communicative, and he's starting. He knows what he wants to say, but maybe can't say it super clearly, so that results in a lot of hitting and throwing. I have 2 boys, for what it's worth.
Oh, so I have 2 girls.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Thanks for sharing. I'm really curious to get into the aspect of what ADHD kind of looks like in the role of parenting, and
absolutely,
I know you do a lot of work, kind of working alongside people that have that have ADHD or other disorders similar. Can you talk a little bit about what it is you do?
Absolutely. So 2 years ago, I made a change. I was working in higher education, and I was director of an academic support program, which for all intents and purposes meant I was running a department of, at the time we called them mentors, but they're probably now called learning specialists.
Right.
And it's for college students with ADHD, learning disabilities, autism, etc., to basically get academic support specific to this program. And I was actually a student in that same program almost 20 years ago. I went to that same college, and I was doing that. And then I decided to be a stay-at-home dad for a bit. And then last year, my wife was talking to me about my aspirations, because I had been talking about what I'm doing now, which is being an educational consultant. And basically what that is I use, my educational background plus my experiences working in higher education to work individually with people, primarily folks like in high school, just after high school, young adults, etc., who just kind of need an unbiased viewpoint of them and whatever post-secondary kind of means to them. And the reason why I specify that is, and I'm sure you can relate to this too, is when you're in high school, it kind of feels like you got either everybody on top of you trying to get you to go in one direction, or it kind of feels like nobody's doing that. Like it really kind of depends on you and, I guess your academics and your overall aspirations. But I kept thinking about what would I have needed when I was 17? So like I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 15, around that time. And it just kind of felt like a little bit of a too little too late situation for me. It wasn't, but at the age of 15, I mean, it just feels like, I'm halfway done with high school. My life is over, quote unquote, but that isn't true.
Yeah.
But what I was really, yeah. And that's what I was lacking, was someone to just kind of talk to me in plain language, in real terms, about me and what I was really thinking about and what I was looking for, so that when I did eventually go off to college, I could feel like I was better prepared to meet those challenges. Perhaps even considering taking a time, like a gap year, like a year or so, in between graduating high school and going to college, to really, to really plan this out. Like, because you sign up for like the loans and you decide to go to an institution. It's all this paperwork and all these new changes, and it's horrifying at times, especially if you're not exactly sure what you want. And I went the conventional route. I went the teaching route, which I don't regret that. But if I could do it over again, I probably would have gone psychology over education. Just based on how things have played out for me professionally, I kind of wish I had done the psychology route first.
Right.
But the good thing about what I did was it led me to where I am right now. And I mean that in terms of where my life is, but also like in the here and now, like talking to you, like I'm doing all of this fun stuff that I never would have considered to be an option like 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think that's an approach that I bring into parenting, is setting the plan, but being flexible to when things are or aren't working.
Yeah.
And I can talk about it later. Like my wife is very A-type. So she has the list. She has the structure, the outline. She has the idea. She has all that stuff. And as you know, especially with the age group of your boys, stuff falls apart quick.
Oh, yeah.
The simple task of going to the grocery store becomes sometimes this Herculean effort. And that's where I think my wife and I work best together. That's where we both shine, is like she might be coming up with the majority of the plans, but I factor in a lot in terms of like when things aren't working, or if we need a reset, or if someone has to think on their feet, I can typically do that a little bit better than she can. And I think that dynamic pairing has really helped us in a lot of different ways. Or sometimes it just comes down to like coming up with a brand new game to play just to keep my kids happy, for like 20 minutes sometimes. And I think ADHD at times gives me an advantage in that space, the creativity parts of things.
Okay. That's awesome. Yeah, I can relate to that a little bit. I think I agree that sometimes when my oldest is normally fine, but when the youngest one is just in a mood and he's like getting upset and he's screaming, like there's not really a huge amount that can kind of stop that, except for just kind of the absurd silliness that dad can sometimes provide when you're outside, and just like, pouring all eyes on you just to be a complete absurdity to make them laugh instead of screaming at you. So I can see that. I just want to pick up. I didn't know that you mentioned that you became a stay-at-home dad for a short time. Can you tell me?
Yes.
What that kind of like? How did you do that? How long did you do that for?
June 22. About a full year.
Okay.
So my wife works in school, so she has the summers off.
Yeah.
So it's not like a full year, but it is. And when my youngest was born, my wife was off, I forget how many weeks, but it wasn't, it's not that long. You only get so much time. So she had like this 6-week gap when she returned to work before the school year ended. So this is like May of last year or something like that. So I had my oldest, who was 2.5, not even 2.5, and my youngest, who was only, 2 months old, something like that, 3 months old. So I was home with them 5 days a week for those 6 weeks. And I don't know. I'm impressed by, I have a newfound appreciation for those that are stay-at-home parents full time, all the time. And having the 2 kids, especially at that young of an age, and just nap schedules, feeding, changing. We hadn't potty trained my oldest yet, so they were both in diapers. And what do I do with them all day? And how do I keep them entertained and keep them out of each other's hair? It was a lot. I discovered the importance of audiobooks while they were home with me because it kept me going in some days. And what I would do is I would pack them in the car around the nap time of my youngest, because my oldest was like fighting them at that point. You know how like they drop down from 2 to 1 and then eventually it becomes none. But my oldest was still at that sweet point where, like, if she was in the car, she's more prone to napping at that point. And my little one had to nap, but I couldn't leave my oldest alone at the time to put her down. So it took some creative juggling. But like I said, it was like I got a problem, not a problem, but I have a logistical issue I have to deal with, and how am I going to make it work? And it was like, stick them in the car, put on the audiobook. It's boring to them. Like, it's just background noise to them. And I would drive like 20 minutes down the road. And then by the time I was coming home, they'd both be out. And then some days, the best days are the ones where I'd park the car, leaving it running. They'd both be asleep. I'd run inside as quick as I could, scarf down food as fast as I could. And then invariably, one would wake up or the other would wake up, whatever. And then it would be back to another 4 hours, of juggling these 2. But the worst days were the hardest days, I should really say, is the days where they would fight the naps the whole way. Or I'd hit a bump just before I got home and one of them would wake up. And then I'd be like, oh no, like I only got like a 15-minute nap out of you and you're about to wake up and I can't do this right now. So to answer your question in a shorter form, I did it for a year with one kid and then tack on like 6-7 weeks with the 2 before my wife's summer vacation started. And it was considerable work.
I mean, so I became a stay-at-home dad when we moved when my youngest was about 8 months. So a little bit older than that. And yeah, like there were some tough times when you're trying to navigate those naps. And I think my oldest was very good at like learning boundaries and things. So we got to a point where we felt safe kind of like having the door open and like putting the younger one down, because I could like always hear him playing with his Duplo or whatever. It's like, well, I know you're being safe. But yeah, it's an interesting world, because I often meet people that ask me what I do. That classic question you ask when you see someone, what do you do? And I'll say I'm a stay-at-home dad, and they sometimes want to say, "Oh, that sounds amazing. Like I don't want to work. I'd love to do that."
Right.
But invariably, if we actually kind of spoke about it and got into it, like I'm sure they maybe wouldn't actually want to do it. And it's a really important thing that you have to want to do it. Like I don't think it's bad that a parent doesn't want to do it. Like my wife doesn't want to be a stay-at-home mum; she wants to work, and like that's great for our family. That's how we've made our choice. There may be families that don't want to have a stay-at-home parent at all, and they want to both work. That's also great. It starts off with the desire to want, and if someone doesn't want to do it, then it's not going to be fulfilling and successful.
Yeah, I fell into it because I made the career change. I didn't have an immediate job lined up. And we had just found out my wife was pregnant, like literally put in my resignation on a Monday, and she left me, because it wasn't our first kid. She left me the test for when I woke up on a Saturday that same week. And I laid in bed for probably 5 straight minutes staring at it going, there's no way. There's no way. There's no way. And my wife was like, it's going to be okay. And I was like, but, but, and she's like, it's okay. She's consoling me. Meanwhile, she knows she's about to be pregnant again, or she is pregnant, I should say. She's about to go through pregnancy again. And she's talking me off the ledge. So I calmed my head down a bit, and I, kind of snapped back into supportive husband mode, and now, dad mode in that regard. But yeah, I kind of fell into the stay-at-home dad thing for a bit. What made it weird or hard for me was we were also in the process of selling our house. Or we had just sold it, I guess. So we were living with my mother-in-law, and she lives in this town. She was living in this townhouse, and the house is not decorated for kids. It's decorated for her. So she has like these beautiful, like glass, everything. Everything's glass and hard surfaces and pointy. It's scary.
And,
yeah. And it's not our home. So we're taking up like a third of one of the 3 levels of her townhouse we have, because we have to stay there. So that only compounded the difficulties of being a stay-at-home dad, was navigating a home that wasn't mine in a space that we had to share. It's my wife's mother, so it's also like those dynamics at times. Plus, my daughter was a year and a half old, so she's fully mobile. She's talking a little bit. She's got, she wants to interact and touch and experiment with everything. And this was going into, we moved in with my mother-in-law in September of 22. So we're going into fall and winter. So it's not even like I can just be like, all right, we're going to go outside all day, because we're going to hit those cold temperatures and then we're stuck kind of. So it was a lot. I took on a teaching assignment at a community college, in part because I wanted to keep current, and in part because I just needed an excuse to leave the house for 4 hours twice a week. And it was short-lived, but it definitely helped my brain a bit, like snap back into like teacher mode, I'm actually thinking about stuff and I mean, grading papers and whatnot too, but like it was really helpful for me as an escape in that way, also doing something that I enjoy and that's fulfilling. But it was like, I need to get out of this house too. And I don't know about you, but that was the interesting thing. And the dynamic with my wife was like, she's pregnant. She's working her job. Her job's super stressful. She's in a school. She's constantly on her feet, the whole thing. And then she'd come home and she's like, how was your day? And I'm like, it was okay. It wasn't great. And she's like, oh, yeah? What were you dealing with today that was so difficult? I'm like, yeah, I get it. But that's why I said too, like, I can 100% appreciate someone who's a stay-at-home parent full-time. Is like you said, like you have people that would be like, oh, I'd love to do that. But then you're in it. And you're like, oh, this is reality now. And I'm taking care of and entertaining and managing this child or children all day. There's no one's going to sweep in and take them off your hands for an hour so you can like shower and use the bathroom by yourself. Like that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And if one of them is sick, or if you're sick and you're just having a really hard time, it's really hard to like, I had a hard time telling people about the struggles that I was having as a stay-at-home dad, because I either got the, oh, come on, how bad can it be? You're just playing with your kid all day.
Yeah.
I'm like, you don't get it. You just don't get it. Or I would get and it's no offense to women, it was like, well, you're dad. Like, you don't have it as, some women would basically approach me like, it's not as difficult for you. So what are you complaining about? And I was like, well, that's super invalidating. Thank you.
Yeah, it's weird.
I'm not the fun dad who just shows up to play the games. Like I'm changing the diapers, I'm prepping the meals, I'm doing any and everything to keep this child going, but also help them learn and make this developmental progress more or less on my own every single day. But I think this is somewhat of new territory, societally speaking, where it's more stay-at-home dads, which I love. I love that dads are stepping up more and being more involved. I hope to see that trend just continue to climb. But I think there's some generational aspects or societal aspects overall that are they haven't caught up to this concept yet.
Yeah, that's true.
You know? And I say that with due appreciation to my wife and the moms out there who are taking on absurd amounts of stress and responsibility. And of course, society is always looking at the mom first to see not even what she's doing, is she doing enough? Like, I completely appreciate that position. But at the same time, it's also, there are these moments from like, I'm invested in this too. Like, I'm not the armchair dad that's like, hey, sport, how was your day? As I drink a highball. Like, that's not how this is working.
Yeah.
But, it's an incremental bit of progress, I suppose.
Yeah. No, I totally relate to that. And I think from what I've experienced here, where I live in the Netherlands, it's never been something that's judged upon. Like, there's quite a common thing here where it's very common for parents to take kind of work 4 days a week, and they might take 1 day off with their kids. So it's like Papa Dag and Mama Dag, and like Mummy's day and Daddy's day with the kids. So like seeing the dad around with the kids is perfectly normal. But I'll get people in the shop say to me, it's like, Papa Dag? Like, they're asking me, Daddy's day? It's like, no, every day. Like,
right, every day. Yeah.
And there are even like some groups, and I was like trying to find places for my kids to like go and interact with other kids, and all these groups are like, they say on it, come and meet other mothers and connect with other mothers for play groups and meet the other children. And then I'll contact them. It's like, can I come? I'm a dad. It's like, oh yeah, you'd be more than welcome. It's like, you say that, but like it still just feels a little bit odd because you still created the advertising about
for moms.
Yeah. So, yeah. But yeah, the one thing that I tell people that is a really interesting thing when I was being a stay-at-home dad, I would go quite a long time without having a really stimulating conversation with an adult. There'd be times when I like, especially if my wife had to like stay. She's also a teacher, so we've got that in common as well. She might have to stay at work a little bit late, and we don't have super amount of time to really go deep and like just kind of talking over dinner with the kids as well. And I would then find myself in a conversation with an adult, and like the very basic vocabulary would just be leaving me, and I'd get to a word, it's like, this next word I know is not a tough word. It's not a word I should have forgotten, but I've forgotten it. Yes. And that's partly what kind of led me to start this podcast. I was like, I need to actually talk to people.
Yes. I know exactly what you're talking about. And that is, it's a unique phenomenon. Again, I think those who don't have kids, I don't think fully appreciate it. Those who do have kids but aren't at-home parents every single day of the week, they have the insights. Obviously, they know what those days are like. But to string them along day after day, week after week, month after month, or even year after year, that really is a substantially different experience. And I don't know about you, like you said, like your wife would work or whatever. She'd come home. She's had the day. She's probably had a day where she was, she's exhausted. She's overstimulated. All those things have happened. Like there would be days my wife would come home. She's a psychologist in a school, and she would be done. And I can see it on her face. She's done, but she has to shift into mom mode. And I'm going, hey, you want to take these kids for like an hour? And she's like, I do and I don't. Like, I also need to like come down from the noise and the movement and everything else. And we'd have conversations about like, we were trying to like make it equitable so that I could drop the kids for like an hour, just something, so that I could just sit by myself and like just be in quiet or do something. Like I said, just something I want to do for like 5 minutes without being interrupted. But then she's coming home and she's so wiped from the day, and there's still getting through the dinner and the shower and the PJs and the getting to sleep. Like it's like it might be 4 hours, but those 4 hours are chock full of things where headaches can come up.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want a bath. I don't want to do this. I don't want to wear those pajamas. I don't like this towel. Like, there's just, or more to the point, I'm not tired yet. And because I'm not tired, I'm going to make your life miserable. Which really what that is like, I'm super tired, but for some reason, my toddler brain says, fight this as hard as you can for as long as you can.
Yep.
Yeah.
it's funny we can like talk about this, and like I think a lot of people who are stay-at-home parents or even spend extra time with the kids during the week will identify. But I think everyone will still agree that we wouldn't change it. Like being able to have the
No.
time with them and the memories
Right.
made and like the formation
Yes.
of their kind of like early development.
Yes.
I know like we used to live, I mean, it's a long story, but we used to live in Hong Kong where we had a live-in nanny who looked after our kids full time because we both worked as teachers. So it was pretty long hours. Part of the reason for moving was to kind of make a shift. And yeah, I chose to do this. It probably won't be forever, but you know, we'll see. And everyone I talk to about my story and other people that have chosen to have a parent stay home is that their time is just so beneficial. And like you look back on it and it is something you can't like give up. You can't take away that like that's been in the formative years of getting to shape their development.
Absolutely.
Let's move on to so you being a parent with ADHD. Can you just talk a little bit about so what would you say are some of the difficulties of being a parent with ADHD?
How much time you got? For those that don't have AD, I've been racking my brain trying to figure out how to make this like digestible, like or to share a life experience, you know, experiential with somebody who doesn't have it. But picture like a morning where you didn't sleep well, your brain is like misfiring constantly, you're having a hard time with your ideas, and on top of all that, like your kids are just all over the place. Like they're just running around the room or they're making a lot, like you're just so, if you can't possibly be in like 4 different places at once, but it feels like you kind of need to, but everything you're trying to do, you're making a mistake. Like, you're putting, like I use creamer or half and half in my coffee. Like I'm putting the kids' milk in my like I'm making all these little mistakes. And ADHD to me, for me, is primarily inattentive. So like as I was called as a kid, like the space cadet, the person staring at the window, my backpack was always filled with just papers shoved in there. There was no folders. There was no sense of organization of any kind, the whole thing. But there's this hyperactive component that I didn't recognize because when I was learning about it, it was just 3 subtypes. Like it was like inattentive, hyperactive combined. And I always just thought it was only only inattentive. And then the more I've done some reflection work and some research about it and talking with other people, I've come to recognize that for me, it's probably like a 60-40 split.
Right.
Or maybe 70-30, where it's 60-70% inattentive. And then there's that quarter, 30% of hyperactivity. It's just, I can sit in the chair like I am now. I can sit calmly for an hour. But I am hyperactive in how I talk. I'm hyperactive in the way I tap and stim and do things. So I say all of that because when we had talked before about the experiences, it's like trying to explain parenting to someone who doesn't have kids. They appreciate it, but they don't fully understand it.
Yeah.
I run into that problem trying to explain ADHD to people sometimes because I can see with some people that I talk to, they're just kind of like, I think you're exaggerating this, or you're just plain making this up because someone quote unquote told you this was a thing, you know, and you just believed it, whatever. But as a parent, there's just so much routine and structure that you want to uphold for your kid for a variety of reasons. But it feels so alien to me because routine and structure are like 2 things that I have a hard time maintaining. I can't even say I don't do them because I do, but I have such a level of difficulty maintaining consistency with routine and structure. So now throw in those expectations or those needs for my kids. And you had asked me before we started all this about like successes as a dad and all that stuff. And that was one of the first things that came to mind. Like I think I told you the bond that I have with my kids, and that's all well and good, and I'm proud of that. I'm sincerely proud of that. But in terms of, but that felt easy. That felt intuitive. I mean, they're my kids, but like some parents don't have those bonds, you know?
Yeah.
But to me, one of the biggest points of contention for me was and I was terrified of this leading up to the birth of my first kid, was, am I going to be a good dad? Not emotionally, not in terms of being comforting and supportive. Am I not going to screw up the essential structures that my kids are going to need?
Right. Yeah.
Feeding schedules, nap schedules, getting them on the school bus in the future, things like. All of a sudden, I started having all of these rushing thoughts about, am I going to be the parent that forgets to do these things or really struggles to do these things? And then not even just about me, because kids see and hear everything you do and they begin to mimic you. So that became a concern too, of like, can I even get myself together enough, not for myself, but for my kid and now children? And I would say, for the most part, a much higher consistency rate than I expected at first. Yes. And like I said, I'm genuinely proud of the bond that I have with my girls, and I'm very excited for the future, and I'm also terrified because the world is scary. But I am when I take those rare moments where I actually look at myself and appreciate what I do, or what I'm trying to do, I should say, what I'm striving to do well is I look at myself sometimes and go, okay, you're not perfect, you're not the best at everything, but you're doing pretty good so far.
Definitely.
And that, to me, that was a difficult internalized conversation to have, because leading up to kids, it was just very easy to pick apart myself and to be my own worst critic or my own worst, the internal dialogue to myself was a lot of negativity, because that's what I heard growing up. So I would say, and it sounds cliche, I totally get that. Having kids was probably meeting my wife, marrying her, having my kids. Those were like the three, I wouldn't say life-saving. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to like dramatize it, but like these were substantial to me.
Yeah.
These were all moments where I went, I don't know exactly what I'm doing at all times, but these feel like the right steps.
Yeah.
Like I had no doubts in my mind about those big transitionary steps in my life. So I'm very fortunate in that regard across the board.
Yeah. I mean, all I'd say is that I'm sure there are many dads who listen to like a podcast like this who would identify with the idea of being concerned about doing the right things for their children, making the right decisions. Right. And that's probably why they're out there listening to podcasts about parenting. On the other side of things, I know the comparison is not super helpful, but I recently filmed an episode with someone, and a big part of our discussion was how do we help those that maybe aren't necessarily looking for the help? Yourself, people listening to this podcast, they are looking for help. They might not be actively studying ADHD, but they're just keeping their ear to the ground. They're trying to have some input so that their output as a parent can be net positive.
Yes.
I've known some dads in my life, like some friends of mine, who I talk to, I'm just like, come on, like, and you're not necessarily like, you're not like you're a bad dad. Like you're there for your kid, but you're just not kind of getting the input and kind of processing and kind of thinking about these sorts of things to be prepared. So like you said, the world is scary. We have to be aware of what's out in the world to raise our children adequately.
Absolutely.
So I think, and if you have these concerns and anxiety, you can definitely look back on the fact that you did a year as a stay-at-home dad and were successful. Like that was always the big thing. Success as a stay-at-home parent. It's like, how do you measure that? Because we go through our whole life of having success as being results on tests when we're at school.
Yes.
And then our success when we're in the professional world is our boss patting us on the back or a promotions
and
and then a stay-at-home parent, like, what's the success criteria? And that was like such a challenge for me. And I almost like asked my wife, I was like, can we work out some like KPIs for me? Like I need some key performance indicators. Come on, tell me what I'm doing wrong. She's just like, I come home at the end of the day, the boys are safe and healthy and well-fed and clean. That's pretty good. So finding that success in parenting is a real challenge for sure.
To tack on to that part, because I had similar moments with my wife too, because it's hard when you're self-directed. And I would say too, like the model that I had growing up was my mom was more of the stay-at-home than my dad was. So that was also in the back of my mind too, was like, I don't have a model of dad being home all the time with us. So how do I reverse engineer this to make it fit me? And then between talking with my wife and then also just having those moments where I was like you said, my kid's safe. She's fed. She's having fun. I'm getting excellent bonding experience with her in this very fertile time in her young mind. Like it's building and fostering something. And I know my wife goes to work some days and or not Sundays. I know she goes every day and just goes, I wish I could just be home right now. And at the time, her being pregnant, so we knew that the family dynamic was going to change.
Yeah.
So, and I just had those moments where I'm like, you know what? And like you said, this doesn't have to be permanent. This can be for a year. This might be it turned out to be 2 years. It could be for 2 years. It could be whatever. And just constantly going back to the idea of I'm doing the greater good for now, for my kids. And in the future, things will change where I can show more favorability to myself in terms of like my work schedule, in terms of my me time. It's just for the time being, I'm going to step up. I'm going to fill in this position and maybe I'm going to learn something from this. And I did, like if nothing else, I have like I said, a much greater appreciation for what this entails. But like you said, it's also hard sometimes. Some days it feels like you're just surviving.
Yeah.
Like trying not to make the day about the TV being on all the time, trying not to make the day in your pajamas the whole day, like really trying your best to make it like there was one day I took my daughter to the park and the wind, like the weather was like crisp October. It wasn't super warm, wasn't super cold. It was like pretty comfortable. And we were there for like 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever it was. And she's just running and laughing and she's on the slide, or she's on the swing. She's going down the slides. She's doing all this stuff. And I kept having these moments of like, God, I wish I could just stop for a minute and just do something else, because I was getting so frustrated by being a stay-at-home dad. But then I saw her giggling and she picked up a leaf or something. Like she was having the absolute time of her life.
Yeah.
And I looked at that and went, part of the reason why this is happening is because she feels comfortable and secure with me. She feels safe. And she's just enjoying so much of life right now.
Yeah.
And I can either be withdrawn from it a little bit, or I can be more present in this moment and just really have fun with her. And I'm making the mental decision whether or not to really ramp up the fun or get frustrated. Like I feel like I'm spinning my wheels. I would tell my wife constantly, like, just feels like I'm spinning my wheels every day. I'm just doing the same thing, which repetition drives me crazy. So I need some variation here and there once in a while. But I think those were the tougher days. It was like, okay, we got to recalibrate. We have to I need to realign my thinking, my perception of things, and just focus on the good. There's nothing bad. It's just, it might not be exactly what I want every day, but that's okay. Like that's acceptable practice. But now I talk about it, I think about it. I'm like, I don't know how I did it, like the everyday constant, but at the same time, I'm happy I did.
Yeah.
Because now with my daughters being the ages that they are, and them going off to school on certain days, I see the bond that I have with them and how much that means to me, but also the opportunity that I didn't waste.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I consciously tried my best to be present with them as much as I could.
Yeah, for sure. And no one gets to the end of their life and wishes they'd spend more time at the office. Like, I think that's the key thing that we can all look back on, or look forward to, I guess, is that idea that we'll look back on this time and know the benefit that it had. So I'm curious, I know that you have a podcast where you talk about ADHD, and you've been interviewing some other guests who are experts in the field. Does learning about ADHD and other conditions like affect how you parent your children?
In the last 6 months, I went back to therapy, and my therapist is fantastic, and his approach really works with me. And I think having conversations, the podcast stuff, writing a blog, or I used to write a blog, producing content on YouTube and talking to people and just doing my own reflection work, in therapy, out of therapy, whatever. I'm starting to approach parenting more mindfully, which some people might hear that and go, well, duh. You have to understand with things like ADHD, being in the here and now is extremely difficult. Like, it really does feel like you, to me at least, it feels like I'm constantly shifting. I'm oscillating between the past and the future, like the ruminations and the anxiety projections of like what has happened already and what could happen. And I'm rarely present where I am right now.
Yeah.
And in the last few weeks, I've been really trying to be more present, to actually literally feel the world around me. Like, there's grounding techniques that you can do, like you can touch something, you can smell something, you can taste it, and my therapist has been working with me on breathing techniques. And I have started to really see the difference that it makes in my parenting, where, like, take this for example, like, your kids are upstairs, or, they're out in another room and they're playing, and you kind of sense something's wrong or something's amiss, whatever. And you're working your way towards the room where they're playing, and you're almost like tensing up, anticipating to see something, right? And at times, the other day I walked in, my daughters were playing, which is great, but I came into my oldest's room and her room was lit, like, it could not have been messier. It couldn't have been messier. And I walked in and I opened the door and I just looked at the mess and I looked at them and I just went, and this had been like a rough day. Like, it was just on all accounts. And I stopped and I took that needed break, like that pause, and I took that needed breath through my nose. And I just asked myself, what's the next step that makes progress? Like, what's the next step? Like, what's the next thing I can say or do that's going to generate something positive, as opposed to this becoming the power struggle?
Yeah.
Which, this too. Power struggles with 3-year-olds don't really work. They they don't really care sometimes that you're the parent. You know what I mean? And I've seen it so many times. You're like, you like, pick up this room, and they're like, playing, like, no. So I was like, okay, if I react this way, I already know what the outcome is going to be. But if I pause, maybe even remove myself from the situation and kind of do like a second take, and those are things I never did in my life for the most part.
Right.
Like, not even just parenting, like just in general.
Yeah.
And just the strong reacting to sometimes the situations would change things for me. And not always in the positive. But the difference, like I said in the beginning of all this, the difference now is I'm not thinking necessarily in terms of what would benefit me. Now it's, what is my relationship, or what is my responsibility to these kids, to my children? the way I treat my wife, the way that her and I communicate together, the way that we work together, shows them things about how they should be treated,
Yeah.
But also how they can deal with their own emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear myself saying this, like, don't get me wrong. A few months ago, if you had said like, oh, just work on your breathing, I would be like, what? Like, my breathing? But now that I've started to do it more purposefully and mindfully, I'm beginning to see the difference,
Sure.
But that would not have come from unless I was doing the research I was doing, unless I was having the experiences and the interactions I'm having. Like you said before about some dads are interested and open to change and suggestion. Some are ambivalent and some are just like, no, I got this. My approach is going to be my approach. It's how I was raised. It's how I'm going to do things, whatever. And it's funny when you said that part about like some dads are just not open to things. I started thinking about like, if I was talking to someone like that, like just having a chat, like how would I approach them? And to be honest with you, I think I would probably start by just listening to them. Like, try to get a sense of a well-rounded sense of like, how do they actually view parenting? Do they have a philosophy on parenting, or is it just what was done to me, I will do to my kids and continue on kind of down the line, Because I don't know about you, but for me, reparenting and relearning how parenting works with the added on component of ADHD has been exhausting, but in the most positive way it can be. It's like having that really strenuous, great workout. And then afterwards, you're like, I'm exhausted, but I feel fantastic. Like I feel accomplished, And that, I think, that's been one of the biggest things too for me is refiguring out this parenting thing so that I can approach my kids a little differently.
Yeah. There's a couple of things I want to pick up on, a couple of notes I've made from what you were saying. I think when you're mentioning the example of like, you feel like you're about to kind of start the power struggle when you see something happening, or you're starting to react in a negative way, feelings of anger or impatience are coming up. I think it's going to be really surprising how much you can think through if you kind of take that pause to kind of be at the door. You kind of said, it's like, I know what's going to happen if I go down this road, and I know what's going to happen if I go down this road. And your brain like can process these things incredibly quickly if you can just bring it back off the ledge, so to speak. It's like it's about to jump into the anger and impatience. If we can come back, then that's the important thing. And I think, getting married and having kids has taught me as much as anything. It's like, just because you have a strong reaction to something, that doesn't make you right. Like,
yes,
just because you get angry at someone, like that doesn't mean that you're correct. Like, if you have a strong reaction, that's your responsibility to deal with it in some way. I totally, and it's like, I'm not in no way judging when I say that, because like I've been sometimes the worst in terms of the strong reactions, in terms of just losing it, when like kids are screaming, older ones are being defiant, like, and just things are just not going to plan. And, those strategies that we talk about of like breathing or grounding or bringing yourself back to kind of know what your emotions are and control them in some way is super, super important.
And sorry to cut you off. Sometimes you're going to screw up. Sometimes you're going to screw up. You're going to say the wrong thing. You're going to react too strongly, too impulsively. That's just sometimes going to happen. And then you stop, like you said, and God forbid you apologize to your kid.
Yeah.
You give them a hug. You say, listen, mommy, daddy, whoever, it was a bad moment. I said something I didn't want to say, or I said it too strongly, whatever. I know where I made my mistake. Hug, apologize, and try to move on from it, but then also try to learn from those experiences,
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, you were saying.
That's all right. I nearly lost my train of thought, actually, but the interruption actually reminded me what I was going to say, so that was useful. So I appreciate it. It was when you mentioned the example I said of another dad maybe not being super open. The next episode that I publish, in terms of where we're at now in October, Mitchell, he's got he's got a channel called Dad Nation on Instagram. We kind of spoke about it, and we came to the, if people might have listened to that episode already, they would know this, but what we kind of were speaking about would be to kind of come alongside that dad and to say, look, I don't know about you, but I'm really struggling with like losing my patience with when my kid does this, this, and this. Have you ever had any issues with that? Or do you have anything that you would suggest to me, or like any tips or that? And then kind of like starting the conversation that way. And then also suggesting, like, I mean, there are so many podcasts or Instagram accounts or YouTube videos just about kind of generic things. And I never want to be the dad that's like, when the problem comes, that's when I do the research about it.
Yes.
Like, I want to be at least a few steps ahead of where my kids are at, so that if something comes up, that I don't feel like I'm being blindsided by something.
Yeah, you want to be as proactive instead of reactive as possible.
Yeah, definitely. So you had mentioned to me about a story going to the emergency room. I'm not sure if it was about your daughter or something.
Yeah.
It was a story. You said you were staying calm throughout, and that was a success from that story. But why don't you go ahead and share that story with us?
Okay. So this is May of last year. So this is May of 23. We had just literally moved into our house weeks ago. And my little one was in the bathtub with my wife. My oldest actually had just come out of the bathtub. I'm in my youngest's room, and we have these carpeted floors. So my oldest comes out. She's like, "Daddy, Daddy." And she has like, she's running in with her towel, whatever. Her foot catches the carpet. Now I'm sitting on a wooden rocker chair that we used to rock my little one to sleep when she was still a baby. And there's a little foot ottoman that's also wood framed. My oldest trips, snags her foot, trips, and smacks right here.
Oh, wow.
Between her eyes, between her eyebrows, smacks her head on the ottoman. I hear a thud. Now, mind you, kids fall and get hurt constantly. So when I say I didn't react, you have to understand from my vantage point, I didn't see the outcome.
Yeah.
But I didn't react because kids get hurt constantly. They're constantly falling. And also, as you know this too, how you react informs how they react. So I usually approach it from a neutral position unless I see, oh, this one really hurts. Like, unless I see that, I'm like, I don't want to give too much just in case I don't want to scare them. So anyway, so my oldest trips, cracks the front between her eyebrows on this wooden ottoman. My wife has the little one in her hands, and my wife's face shifts dramatically. And I'm like, what? And my it was like a movie. My oldest turns and looks up at me, and blood is just coming down her face.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, okay. So my wife is understandably, but this is also the dynamic differences between the two of us, just for preference, or just to let everybody know. My wife is immediately panicking, running around, trying to figure out what are the next steps, calling our friends because their daughter did something similar. What did you do? Where did you go? What did they have to do? All that stuff.
Yeah.
My oldest is understandably terrified because it hurts, but also mommy is now all over the place. And again, I don't begrudge my wife for anything that she did. She was acting with complete care and, concern for my child. And I looked at my daughter and I was like, are you okay? And she's kind of like looking at me like, I don't know how to react. Like she doesn't know what to do. So I was like, just come here. And I just picked her up and held her, and she's bleeding. And I was like, trying to get her, because she doesn't know what happened, but it was a sizable cut in her face. I was like, sweetie, just don't touch your face. I know it hurts. I know you can feel the blood, etc. Like, just do me this small favor. I'm going to put your pajamas on you. We're going to bring your sister to Nana's, and we have to go to the hospital. And I wanted to be upfront with her because she was conceptually just starting to understand what a doctor is, what a hospital is, and I didn't want her to get freaked out. So to my daughter's credit, in the car, we gave her We gave her our phone because we figured if there's going to be a time for her to be a little distracted, this is a good time for it.
Yep.
So my wife and I are on the way to the hospital with my oldest, and we get to the emergency room, and my wife is a trembling mess. So I walk in, and I'm holding my kid, and I'm like, listen, they're like, what happened? And I was like, she fell. I'm explaining the whole my wife's trying, but she's forgetting things. She's all over the place. I'm like, sweetie, let me handle this. I got it. Like, I got this. And we go through the whole process. We get her in the room. The doctor and another person come in. They eventually do stitches, which,
oh, wow.
Boy, when I tell you that it took everything in my being to hold it together so that my daughter didn't see me fall apart and freak out. I had to hold her in place so they could stitch her face. Like, she's screaming. It's a whole thing. So it's over. They give her an ice pop. And again, to my daughter's credit, she's so tough. She's focusing on what color ice pop she was going to get, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing what kids can do. So the long and the short of it, we get her home. The recovery time takes a few months. She did okay. You can see a little bit of a line in her head, but I see her every day and I don't notice it. I completely forget it's there. And then when we got home, then I broke apart to myself. And I had a really hard time for a little while afterwards. It was a mix of guilt, a mix of just, it was that reminder of how horrifying how quickly things can turn terrifying. Seemingly with nothing. Like her foot caught the carpet, and just because of the length and speed, she just happened to hit her head.
Yeah.
What was normally a funny thing where she just falls on the floor and she laughs about it and makes a joke out of it, we're rushing her to get her face stitched. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
But the reason I bring this story up in connection to ADHD is when I was unpacking it to myself later, I realized part of it is I processed almost instantaneously what the next steps were going to be. Oftentimes, my internal world is so chaotic, and not to make it sound dramatic, but this is a constant just cavalcade of thoughts and ideas and thought fragments, and I'm creating dialogue between characters I just made up in my head based on things that are going on. It's just, I'm making up, it's exhausting sometimes.
Yeah.
But when the external world sometimes matches what's going on in my head, I get weirdly calm. And I felt very okay in the moment, because I knew my daughter was okay. Like, this wasn't life-threatening. I knew she was okay. I also knew exactly what the next steps were going to be. My wife was handling the communication with, like, her mom to get my little one over to her. And I was like, all we have to do is get her in the car and get her to the hospital, and she's going to be fine. And I truly think on some level, I think in part because of ADHD. And like I said, and I've noticed in other areas of my life and other times, like being a classroom teacher and whatnot, when the class is so chaotic, even though obviously you don't want it to be that way, I feel sometimes just weirdly okay with it.
Yeah.
And I'm not put off by it. And I can navigate. And weirdly enough, I don't know about your experiences, like when you teach, like when you raise your voice, the students match you.
Yeah.
But when you speak at the normal talking point or at the normal level volume and at your normal cadence, it kind of Jedi mind tricks them sometimes to like tone it back down because you're not giving them kind of what they're expecting. And that's another thing I've kind of developed over time with my kids is like, if I blow up, it just enhances the challenge to them to match me in terms of volume.
Yeah. So
the long and the short of it is, those are like those moments where I'm like, knock wood, if the you know what's going to hit the fan, I think I'll be okay in those moments. Not that I want that to happen, but at least I know that about myself. But it was also like I would talk to other parents afterwards and they're like, oh my God, my kid fell on the playground. They split their, like, all of a sudden you realize too, like, you're not the only one that's gone through this.
Yeah.
In a good way, in the sense of like other parents have had to deal with similar and to come, like there's still plenty to come, I'm sure. But you kind of see how you're tested in that regard. You know, if you want to make a positive spin on all this. And like I said, my wife, as much as I made it seem like she was falling apart, and, you know, understandably she was so good at being there for my kid. Like she was so good at being comforting, especially when we were all done. Like she stepped into super mom mode in that regard.
Yeah.
And she kept checking in on me because she could tell I was I was holding everything together or holding everything in. And she's like, kind of like giving me a knowing pat of like, I know it's coming.
Yeah.
That you're going to break apart. Do you want me kind of there with you when it happens, or do you need the space to do it on your own? And I just kind of, I had to wait. And then eventually the time came and I was just like in the basement or wherever by myself. And I was like staring at the floor. My hands are trembling a little bit. And I was just like, wow, damn. And then, you know, I processed it and, you know, now we can kind of laugh about it, but it was, you know, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible what can happen at times. So
yeah, I appreciate you sharing the story. I'm sure lots of people, like you said, like there are lots of parents that do have these stories, and I think it's really interesting that it's only once you kind of share a story like this with someone that then they're sharing theirs back at you almost, and you're then in the club, so to speak.
Right.
I don't have time for me to go into it, but I actually did one episode of like a solo podcast where I spoke about there was a period my oldest son, he had to go to hospital 2 different times for breathing troubles, and we had to call out an ambulance for him in the middle of the night because his breathing was so bad, and you know we were really concerned. So he was like rushed to the hospital in the middle of the night. And then another time it was less acute, and we went to the local doctor, but then they also sent us to hospital because he just needed like care, like longer term care for his airway, for his breathing. And it was a similar thing, like the doctor was like, oh, this is so common in kids this age because they're smaller. If they get a small virus, it can affect their airway and blah, 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 blah. And then I would speak to other friends who had kids that were a bit older than us. Like, oh yeah, that happened to my daughter as well. I was like, God, I wish this was like, I wish I knew it was this common before it happened, because I was so worried. And I think the actual processing of these sorts of stories as parents is so incredibly like necessary. So I do think like I obviously shared that story with people, and then obviously doing the podcast episode where it was just by myself. That was a really helpful tool for me to kind of like to know what I could take away from the situation to apply to my parenting, and then to kind of be able to talk to you right now and give you the short version of the story without kind of taking up like loads of time. Like I've been able to process it and get it down to a short version and know what the kind of the takeaways are. And I think that's such an important part of these harrowing moments of seeing the one that we love so much and not being able to do something for them and having to kind of like let go and let the doctor or like, that's quite a difficult thing. Going through that moment is like, I'm powerless to help my kid. It needs to be someone else. And that's a really difficult thing to process sometimes. Yeah.
And your son is okay though?
Yeah. So he now has an inhaler. So he's too young. He's too young to be diagnosed as asthmatic yet.
Okay.
The doctor basically said this is quite common for kids until they get up to the age of like 6 or 7. If it's not passed by the time they're that age, we then look at it again and see if he does suffer from asthma. Right now, it's just something that you have to deal with. And when the seasons turn, you have to make sure that he basically has a steroid inhaler once a day. And then he has the kind of asthmatic inhaler in case he has like a quote unquote asthma attack, when it's not like a real asthma attack.
Yeah.
So it's kind of adjacent to that.
Yeah. Well, I'm, you know, for what it's worth, I'm happy. At least you guys have an answer. It's always, I always get anxious hearing about like kids with like breathing issues. Just you know, but I'm happy that, you know, like you said, you have an answer, you have a treatment solution, at least for right now. And hopefully like for him and for you guys, like when he's of that age, it just kind of naturally passes through, and that's that. So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I really do believe that it's so funny that there are so many parenting classes for when you first have your kid, like how to put a nappy on, how to swaddle them, how to do this, how to give them a bottle.
Right.
All very important things, you know. But like, where's the parenting class for when they're, waking up at 3 a.m. not being able to breathe?
Yes.
I guess there's first aid classes for that sort of thing.
Well, there's also where's the parenting classes for when your kid's 5? Where's the parenting classes when they're like adolescent? You know, it's like, I think that's a great point about, all the education and literature before you have kids and during the early stages. But what about when they're 10, when they're 15? Like, how do you deal with those big developmental changes too? Because it's substantial. But
I think the more I've spoken to people on this podcast, especially people that are maybe a little bit later in life that have older kids, like grandparents, they always come back to the whole, you need a village. Yes. And that's amazing. It's like when someone does have a village, but it can be difficult when you're trying to make your village out of social media, which I think maybe some parents do, which maybe isn't the best thing. Or maybe even make your village out of podcasts like this, which I wouldn't recommend to people. I think it's a very beneficial thing.
Yes.
But we are not trying to be anyone's village because we're not actually in the presence of these people.
Right. Exactly.
But that's a soapbox for another time, I think. As we come towards the end of our time, the question I always tend to ask people towards the end is if you can flash back to your oldest daughter is just about to be born, maybe a few weeks before, what advice would you give to Dustin just about to become a dad for the first time?
Oh, man. Calm down. Your wife is about to go through a considerable amount of work. So keep your focus on her and the baby, but just try to be as present as you can be with what's about to happen. And also the couch or the chair that you're going to sleep on is going to suck. That's just reality. Like that's part of almost like the initiation of like every dad, as it were, or partner. So just accept that for what it is. But most importantly, like you're going to do great at this. And as long as you learn to trust what is intrinsic to you and be less concerned about what you think a dad is supposed to be, or like matching those models of machismo, right? Like you know what I mean? Like the conventional dad approach of, I don't have feelings, I don't hug my kids. Like that's not you. Like that's not who you are, and that's not how you're going to approach your daughters. And no one's going to make you feel shameful or weird about it. And if they even give you a sideways glance about being too affectionate with your kids, that's probably more of their problem than yours. Reality.
Yeah, definitely.
And just enjoy it, because it's, as everyone tells me, it goes incredibly fast, and it does. But like every sleepless night, every blowout that happens in the most inopportune times are going to be fantastic stories when your kids get older, so you can embarrass them too.
Oh yeah, that's what we're looking forward to.
Yes.
Oh man, well, thank you so much for sharing so much. Can you just let listeners know where they can find more of you if they're interested in hearing more of your content, your podcast?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I have a podcast called ADHD in a Hurry. And it's a solo cast for the most part. And then recently I've been doing interviews. So you can find it through Spotify. And then there's like Apple Podcasts and iHeartRadio and a bunch of other platforms also. But if you type in pch-consulting.com, that's my website, you can find all my information through there. And of course, like and subscribe and share and all that stuff would be great. But I'm just really trying to produce all this content just to see if I can help, even just one person. Just to be like, oh, you do that too? Or I didn't know there was a name for that. Or maybe I'm just not so weird. Maybe there is, maybe I'm not so strange.
Yeah. No, I'd recommend it even if people haven't been diagnosed with ADHD. I do think it's really
absolutely.
important. Like we discussed before we started filming, I think it's a really important thing that people are more aware of and know how a little bit of insight into the world and can approach it if from your mouth is a very good way to raise that awareness.
Appreciate that.
Cool. So Dustin, thanks so much for joining us today. I really do appreciate your time on the
Absolutely.
podcast.
Thanks, dude.
And there we have another Dad Dialogue conversation. Of course, a huge thank you to Dustin for coming on the show with us and sharing his perspectives and his stories with us. I really enjoyed talking to Dustin, and it really did help me understand just more about the challenges that some people face when it comes to parenting and other things. I really do believe that educating ourselves on various disorders like ADHD and other things can really help us grow as people, whether there's someone in our life that suffers from it or not. I think it's a really important thing to learn. And I think that just want to highlight what my point was during the episode of why I think that's important. Because when I was a teacher, former teacher to young children, I specifically remember a situation where a learning enhancement teacher had given me a strategy for one particular girl who we suspected to have ADHD and some other possible disorders. She had given me the strategy to use with her to see if it helped. I ended up using that strategy for the whole class that I was teaching, and it helped almost the whole class. So I think it's really important that we kind of highlight these strategies that people use to kind of maximize their time, maximize their efficiency, and maximize their life. Like, these strategies that are developed for some types of people aren't just for them. They can work for you as well, and for me, and for many of us and our kids. So just me saying that it's good to do a bit of research and learn about this and hear from people like Dustin, it's not me saying that we all need to be super prepared and super worried about a possible disorder that our children might get, but it's just useful having these extra tools in your toolkit. So that was my kind of point, and that I hope that kind of comes across in the episode. And as I said, I've really liked talking to Dustin. If you'd like to hear more about him and his podcast, it's called ADHD in a Hurry. I'll put a link in the description. And if you'd like to hear more about the services that he offers in terms of the kind of future planning for young adults and students, links to his website will be in the description as well. So I really appreciated talking to Dustin about all these different things that we had in the episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to get in touch with the show or register your interest in being a guest, daddialogue.co.uk. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the Dad Dialogue podcast. I hope you have a great day, and I hope to talk to you again soon. Goodbye.